Hi there, my name's Andrew Walker. I'm from the College of Asia and the Pacific here at the ANU, and today I'm talking to Andrew MacIntyre, who's our outgoing Dean. Andrew, you've had a long-standing personal and professional interest in Indonesia, so how does it make you feel to see the relationship now between Australia and Indonesia on a pretty poor footing?
So look, there's no doubt there's real difficulty in the government-to-government relationship. That's happened from time to time in the past, but it's always important for Australians to keep in mind that the wider country-to-country relationship, which is about way more than government, is pretty robust. There's good solid commercial relationships. As you and I know, there are good solid flows of students in both directions. And there's lots of movement of people with travel and tourism. And as you and I both saw when we were in Jakarta recently, although there's no doubt there is real difficulty in the government-to-government relationship, it's not across the whole spectrum. Indonesia runs a professional foreign policy, and as we saw when we discussed cases of graduate students having difficulty getting visas to go and do research in Indonesia. Senior Indonesian government officials that we were talking with said, that shouldn't be the case. And we know the Foreign Ministry doesn't want that to be the case, so let's get that fixed up. So they don't want to see it spill over. In short, yeah, there's a pretty serious political problem here, but it is not, it's not translating into a disaster for the overall relationship.
You said this is a pretty serious political problem, and it's a pretty serious political year in Indonesia with an upcoming parliamentary and presidential election. How do you see those playing out, and how do you see that affecting the relationship with Australia?
Well, one never knows for sure what happens in elections, but to the extent any election is susceptible to foreseeing, the opinion polls in this election in Indonesia have been extraordinarily clear-cut and extraordinarily consistent. They're showing overwhelming, massive support for one candidate for the presidency, and that's Joko Widodo, the current governor of Jakarta. We don't know for sure whether he will be the president, because we don't know for sure whether he'll be a candidate, because he doesn't yet have a party to nominate him. There's an expectation that he's going to be invited by PDIP to be its candidate, but that hasn't happened yet. If that does happen, it would take some extraordinary event from left field to derail it. So at this stage, the only thing one could confidently say is that if he gets the nomination, he will probably win, and win strongly. There are other scenarios, but that's the most probable one. Were that to happen, what does that mean for Indonesia? What does that mean for Australia? It would be a good thing for Indonesian democracy. He is a candidate that the public strongly wants to see become leader. And that would be good for deepening the roots of democracy. But it won't be all smooth sailing. Jokowi, as he's known for short in Indonesia, all his inclinations, aptitudes and achievements are very much as a local politician. It's sorting out garbage problems, traffic problems, local market problems, things that people care about, but they're not the things national governments deal in. So he'll have to make quite a transition into learning and getting comfortable with the policy levers available to a national government. It's also the case that he's had very little to do on the international front. The rest of the world, especially Australia, has got very comfortable with the Yudhoyono administration because it's been exceptionally internationalist in its orientation. So there'll be a change there. It's not that this would be an inward-looking or particularly nationalistic government, but it will be less externally engaged. In fact, you could probably say that for any of the candidates. They will be less externally engaged than Yudhoyono. And in that sense, Australia and the rest of the world are going to have to get used to an Indonesia they need to try harder with, work harder with, to get the same level of engagement.
Do you see any risk in some of the populist sentiment and even some of the nationalist sentiment for Jokowi in a less sympathetic attitude towards Australia?
I think there will be some of that. I mean, that's the principal fallout of the last 3-4 months of difficulty in the bilateral relationships, partly relating to just objective disagreement between Jakarta and Canberra over how best to handle the asylum seeker problem, partly differences in political packaging, irritation in Jakarta with the way things were packaged in Canberra, particularly in our elections last year, and now irritation in Canberra with the way things are getting framed in Jakarta as their electoral cycle heats up. But that's been compounded, of course, by the revelations from the Snowden leaks about Australia's covert intelligence gathering operations in Indonesia. And that's damaged goodwill, there's no question about it. People who are professionals in this space know this kind of thing goes on, and it's not new information to them, but it is new information to the public at large. And it leaves nobody with a good taste in their mouth. And it makes it very hard for an Australian head of government or an Australian minister to come saying, we really want to build trust and engagement with you. It's very hard to say that. So, yes, I think that will encourage something that's coming through anyway, just because of Indonesia's own internal political cycles. Yeah, that will feed in a bit to something more of a nationalist theme in political life.
Looking beyond Indonesia, what do you see as the key challenge for Australia in us achieving what we're trying to achieve, to build an Asian century in terms of our orientation to the region?
So, well, something you and I both know, I mean, the Asian century is going to happen regardless of anything we do. And the real issue is how well are we prepared to engage with it. Look, probably the single most important things are the boring things. And they were the sorts of things that are acknowledged on both sides of the Australian Parliament and are reflected in the Henry Report and other reports that preceded it. I mean, the single most important thing is the vitality and robustness of the Australian economy, because that underpins everything else coming out of here. But having said that, there are things that international policy contributes directly to. Perhaps the biggest shift, or the biggest challenge, will be the power shift that's going on in the region. It's something that pretty much everyone now has a sense of. It's the rise of new Asian powers, most dramatically, most conspicuously China. But there's just all sorts of shifts going on in the relativities. To use that wonderful phrase of our late colleague Coral Bell, we're living through the end of the Vasco da Gama era. This is no longer an era where the West will write the rules and dominate the global games in ways that it has in the past. Perhaps one other point to mention is, I think, the importance of education. You and I care deeply about the tertiary sector, and there's no doubt that universities have got a special role they can play. I would say actually even more important than the universities, what the high schools do, and even more important than the high schools, what the primary schools do. And again, my strong sense is that both sides of the Australian Parliament get this. Both sides are really keen to see progress on what you might broadly call Australia's Asia literacy, the comfort and confidence in which Australians of all sorts of walks of life can operate and move through Asia. That's something we can and should boost.
Talking about the end of an era, it's going to be at the end of an era for you personally. You've been here at ANU for more than a decade. Are there a couple of things during that time that you'd reflect on as real highlights in the work you've done here at ANU?
Hard question, which I don't have a crisp answer to. But look, I think one thing I would say is I think there is now, thanks to the efforts of many people, a much more coherent voice about the full array of scholarly magnificence that exists at this university relating to Asia and the Pacific. This university's long had just an extraordinary array of talent, but there's never been a coherent story about it, for reasons that go to the history of the university and the past structures of the university. It's always been multiple narratives. These things never came together. So the campus, the country, and the whole world has never really had a very good sense of just how much there is here. And I think that's one thing that has changed. There's a lot more that can be done, but that's something that's changed. I think there's also a healthy change in the way ANU thinks about itself. There's a sense in which ANU has kind of thought of itself as Australia's international university rather than Australia's national university. And by that I mean, I think ANU has historically, for wonderful reasons, been focused on reaching out to the whole world. And that absolutely needs to continue. But I suspect that sometimes that's been at the cost of not paying as much attention as we should to what's going on in Australia and our role in Australia and the contributions we can, should, and I believe must make. That's changed in recent years. We take our domestic constituencies really seriously now, along with our global aspirations, and I think that's good.
Andrew, thanks very much. Thanks for the contribution you've made here at the ANU, and all the best for your future career.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.